Alright, so welcome to the second video for 1.3, equivalent rational numbers. Just a quick reminder of the learning objectives for 1.3. You should already have these down, but it never hurts to have it again. So in this part of 1.3, we're going to be talking about identifying equivalent proper fractions, mixed numbers, and improper fractions. So we're still talking about fractions. So to understand fractions, we got to think about whole numbers too. Without whole numbers, it's impossible to understand fractions because a fraction is part of a whole. Now, what is a whole number? Well, whole numbers are like 1, 8, 56, 278, numbers that don't have fractions in them. But not all numbers are whole. Okay? So a fraction describes part of a whole number. Okay? You should be familiar with fractions in your everyday dealings, especially in cooking. So if we look at a recipe that calls for half a cup of chocolate chips, we know that half of a cup represents 1/2 of a whole cup, a whole 1 cup. So the fractions are just part of a whole number. Okay, so what makes up a fraction? So the number below the bar is called the denominator. Okay, so that's the bottom number is our denominator, which tells how many parts the whole is divided into. So if we have a denominator of 3, that means that there are 3 parts that the whole is broken up into. Same thing if we had a 4 on the bottom, it would be 4 parts. 5 on the bottom, 5 parts. Okay? The numerator is the number above the bar in the fraction, which tells us how many parts of the whole that we have. Okay, so in our example of a recipe, it calls for half a cup. The denominator is 2, so we know that our whole cup is divided into 2 parts. And the numerator is 1. That's kind of mixed up there. So we know that we need 1 of those 2 parts for our whole cup. Okay. Now a whole can be divided into infinite number of parts. We can divide 1 cup. You can divide 1 cup of flour into thirds, sixths, tenths, and so on. Fractions which describe the same part of a whole are called equivalent fractions. So remember that the word equivalent means equal. So for instance, if you measure out half a cup of flour, or 2/4 of a cup of flour, or 3/6 of a cup of flour, you still have the same amount, because 2/4, 1/2, and 3/6 are all equivalent fractions. So when we have a fraction, we can create a new fraction that is equivalent to that one. We would call that making equal fractions or making equivalent fractions. There's a couple of ways to make equivalent fractions. The first way is to simplify the fraction to make it smaller. To simplify a fraction, we can reduce the number in the numerator and the denominator by dividing them by the same thing. So for example, if we have 4/8, we can rewrite that as 1/2 by dividing the top and the bottom by 4. Okay? So, but the thing you got to remember is not all fractions can be rewritten by dividing. Okay? If that only works if the top and the bottom are divisible by the same number. If they're both only divisible by 1, then we can't divide, and we would say that our fraction is in simplest form. So an example of that would be if we had 5/7 and we wanted to make equivalent fractions. I can't divide because 5 and 7 don't have any numbers that go into both. Okay? It has to be something that both can be divided into. So for example, if we had 6/9, 6 and 9 have a factor in common. I can divide the top and the bottom by 3, and that would give me an equivalent fraction of 2/3. So here's our example. We want to simplify 6/18. Okay, so to simplify this fraction, we look for a number that we can divide into both the numerator and the denominator. Okay, and we want to look for the largest number that we can take out of both. In this case, that number is 6. Okay, 6, since it's the biggest number we can take out of both, we would call that the greatest common factor, or GCF. Okay, so to simplify, we would divide the top and the bottom by that, and that's what we see right here. 6 divided by 6 is 1, 18 divided by 6 is 3. Our simplified answer is 1/3. Okay, so that's how we can find an equivalent fraction by dividing. The second way we can do it, and one that's a little easier and we can do it with every fraction, is by multiplying the top and the bottom. So if we multiply our numerator and denominator by the same number, we will still get an equivalent fraction. And the nice thing is it does not matter what number you choose. Okay? The only thing that matters is that you multiply the top and the bottom by the same number. So if I wanted 6 and 18 again, but instead of dividing, I could multiply by 2. 6 times 2 is 12, 18 times 2 is 36. This is an equivalent fraction to 6 over 18, and I got that by multiplying. And I can multiply it by any number. 6 over 18, if I want to multiply by 3, I can do that. 6 times 3 is 18, 18 times 3 is 54. Here is another equivalent fraction. So our next example, we're going to create an equivalent fraction for 7/8. Okay, so the two ways to do it, first of all, we look for something that would divide into both. Okay, so 7 and 8. Okay, there's no numbers that divide into both 7 and 8, so I can't make the fraction smaller. However, I could make it larger. And to do that, I multiply the top and the bottom by any number that I want to, as long as it's the same. Okay, now, generally, you want to keep the number that you're multiplying small. So 2 is a great option. Now, does it have to be that? No, you can multiply it by 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever you want it to be. But generally, we want to keep it small so that the math that we're doing is easier for us. 7 times 2 is 14. 8 times 2 is 16. Here I have an equivalent fraction. So the example that I want you to do is, I'm giving you 8/12. You need to write 4 equivalent fractions for that. So I want you to pause the video, find 4 equivalent fractions, and then hit play and see what I've come up with. Now, to keep in mind, there's an infinite number of fractions that we could come up with. So what you have might not be the same as what you see on the screen. That doesn't make it wrong. It just means it's different than the ones that I have chosen. So go ahead and find 4, and then hit play and see how you did. So here are the 4 that I have chosen. First of all, I decided to divide both sides by 2. So 8 divided by 2 is 4, 12 divided by 2 is 6. My first equivalent fraction is 4/6. Next, I decided to divide by 4 because 4 goes into both of these numbers as well. So 8 divided by 4 gives me 2, 12 divided by 4 gives me 3. My second equivalent fraction is 2/3. Now there are no more numbers that I could divide into both 8 and 12. So if I want 2 more, I'm going to have to start multiplying. So that's what I did. First one, I decided to multiply both sides by 2. 8 times 2 is 16. 12 times 2 is 24. 16 over 24 is another equivalent fraction. And the last one, I decided to multiply the top and the bottom by 3. 8 times 3 is 24. 12 times 3 is 36. My fourth equivalent fraction is 24 over 36. Now once again, there could be ones that you have found that I did not, okay, and that doesn't mean they're wrong, that just means that they're different. Okay, so keep that in mind as we're going through here.